This afternoon, though, we're going to be talking about all sorts of things, including what it is to be a new author in Oxfordshire. David P Elliot has recently published a collection of short stories called Pieces of Fate. I was reading some of them over the weekend.
That's a good
Pieces of Fate.
Yeah.
They're kind of tales of the unexpected sort of stories, and they're based in and around Oxfordshire. There's one based in a radio station on the Banbury Road.
Who gets killed? The afternoon presenter.
Let's hope not. Haven't got to the end of it yet. So we're going to be finding out how not only he is promoting this new book, but he's also helping other indies, as he calls them, independent published authors, to get their books read and seen and recognised across the UK. And author David P Elliot's going to be joining me in the next half hour of the show. He has a new book out, a collection of short stories, Pieces of Fate. I was reading a couple of them over the weekend. One or two of them catching my eye. I'll explain why in a moment. But we're going to be finding out too why author David is dedicating his time to encouraging other new writers too. But David P Elliot is passionate about getting people reading. As an ex-policeman and IT consultant, he recently published his second book, a collection of short stories called Pieces of Fate. But he's got bigger plans now than adding author to his CV, as we can find out. He joins me in the studio. Welcome back, I should say, because it was 3 years ago you were sitting exactly where you are now, talking about your first novel, which was Clan.
That's right, yes.
What has happened in those 3 years?
Well, long journey, really. It's, went on to sell in 15 countries. Shortly after seeing you, we had a great event in Scotland. It was the Elliot Clan event, happens every 4 years. And then there was this huge event, the homecoming, gathering of the clans. 50,000 people turned up in Edinburgh, so I was up there signing copies of the book. So
fully fledged author.
Yes, I suppose so.
Now, remind people who might not have caught you first time in, or might not remember the story behind Clan, how you actually came to write that book.
Well, yeah, I talk about it as being a midlife crisis, Jo. I think most men in their 50s go through one of two types of midlife crisis. One is you probably know somebody who's decided at 57 that he ought to get himself a motorbike and start...
I'm not pointing any fingers anywhere.
Running round clubs. The other sort, which I think is the sort I had, is that you find yourself going into feeling like you're rushing towards death without actually ever having done anything that you feel proud of. And so I had been doing some family history research, found out some fascinating stuff about border reivers, the borders of Scotland, and knowing that my family was mixed up in it. And the deeper I got into it, the more interesting and exciting it became. So I decided that I should write a book about it, and that's where Clan came from. So a lot of the history was real history. Some of it was ancient myth, but there was this, I decided to put this fictional thread in all the way through, and it seems to have touched the hearts of a few Scots around the world. I mean, I don't know if you know, but certainly in the USA, most of the people... Very
proud of their heritage.
Yes, most of the people who don't claim to be Irish claim to be Scottish. So it's... and I've met so many people, and it's just been a wonderful journey, really. And
more than just becoming a writer, though, you had the chance to experience what it was to get published, because lots of people write their books, but you were determined to see it through that next hurdle too.
Well, that's right. It's I came into the publishing industry not knowing anything about it. I mean, it's very difficult to find out, particularly at a certain age, to go into an entirely new industry. The conventional wisdom seems to be that if you're writing fiction, then you have to have an agent, and so I spent all my time looking for an agent, got one, worked with that agent for a few months, and then she went out of business. So I was left with a book that was pretty much ready to go to publishers, but having lost the channel to those publishers, I guess, which was an insider. So I had a choice, really, just before Christmas, was either to start again or to bite the bullet and try and publish it myself. And that's the route I took.
And Red Cap Publishing was born?
Well, Red Cap came a bit later, actually. So, actually, Pieces of Fate came out under the Red Cap imprint. Red Caps are actually the little monsters that appear in Clan, so I thought it was quite a
Keeping it
nice
topical.
name. Yes, absolutely. And the picture of our logo now is Hermitage Castle, picture of Hermitage Castle, which is the spookiest place in the country. So if you
Is that right? We might mark it down for Halloween.
Yes.
What did you think that getting involved in publishing in this way could offer you in terms of challenges? I mean, was that what you were looking for? New challenges, new ventures?
Well, I'd come out of business. I've been in the IT industry for 30-odd years, so I thought I knew a little bit about business. When I started to find out about publishing, I call it commercial lunacy. It doesn't seem to make any sense whatsoever. And most of the publishing industry seem to be trying to put themselves out of business. So you can see Borders have gone down. They've now gone down in the States. Barnes & Noble are losing money. Waterstones have just been sold off. And there seems to be, there doesn't seem to be a channel to market good writers.
So how did you think you could fit into this?
Well, I think it was just a case of going through the process and seeing that, and making mistakes. And I felt over the year or so that I was going through that exercise, I made all the mistakes that could be made. And I thought I might try and give some of it back and try and help some other people
avoid making
the same mistakes,
themselves.
the obvious ones to avoid, and that was the purpose, really. And you also need, I think, to differentiate yourself between yourself as a writer and as a publisher. So hence the setting up of the imprint, and first book to come out under that imprint was actually a German translation of Clan, and then Pieces of Fate, and now we're working on a few other things as well under the same imprint.
Well, we'll talk a little bit more about those aspects and those ventures you're pursuing in a moment or two. Talk more about Pieces of Fate as well, because I've already alluded to some rather familiar settings in some of those stories, and I don't just mean by Oxfordshire there. So we'll be back with David P Elliot in a second, finding out how he is sharing his experiences, his wisdom of the publishing industry with others, and why Pieces of Fate hit a chord in this building after the Carpenters. Well, what we're doing this afternoon is hearing from Abingdon-based author David P Elliot. We were just recapping, as it were, the last time we met about 3 years ago when David came in to talk about his first novel, which was called Clan. Great things going on from that. Sold in 15 countries, a German translation. You've done an audiobook version of that as well. And it gave you an incredible insight into the publishing industry, which you thought you could do something with. And that's how and why you're now in the position that you are today, looking to work with other independent authors. Is that right? Yes,
that's right. I mean, there's always been the traditional way of doing it. We refer to them as trade publishers, and that's those big publishers like HarperCollins and the like, who take on an author and pay all the costs effectively, but they take ownership pretty much of the book, and they pay a royalty. Unfortunately, it's descended into a situation where you either have to be a mass seller, like J.K. or Dan Brown or Ian Rankin, or you need to be a celebrity. And actually, there are thousands, literally thousands, of great writers out there who just don't ever see the light of day. And with some of the problems we've got in society at the moment on literacy issues, we need more writers, and we need more books, and we need a few less celebrities, frankly.
So how are you redressing the balance?
Well, what we're trying to do is to get together a group of like-minded individuals, indies, like they're generally called, independent authors, but not only authors. We want publishers, graphic designers, editors, copy readers, all of these sort of people who can help authors who just have a talent perhaps to write, and actually help them produce a book. There's a whole industry out there of companies who are, I think, leeching off the back of those people. They're more interested in how much money the author's got in his pocket than how many books they can sell. So, they're often taking thousands of pounds off individual authors just to publish a book. And it's not hard. It's not hard to publish a book. 99% of the work was writing it. So it's a shame if you end up paying lots of money to somebody who's just going to print the thing for you effectively.
So you're, I guess, sort of acting, hopefully, a sort of conduit between the author and the public, introducing the public to these books, to these authors.
Yes, and well, there's two sides, because now with modern technology, you can actually print small numbers at a relatively reasonable price, but the channel to market is still difficult. It's the publishers, the big publishers, who own the channels to Waterstones. I mean, if you go into a big Waterstone store and you see Ian Rankin all over the table, it's probably because the publishers paid £40,000 to have that table. And
there are not many authors at the beginning of their writing career that have that sort of budget to play with.
So we're trying to create a channel so that people can have venues, really. It's about, most independent authors need to be able to do signings and talks and Q&A sessions and meet readers, and hopefully sell a few books on the back of it, and perhaps earn a living, and the general public get access to some decent books in the process. So, and
everybody likes to be on something at the beginning, so you don't know who you might come across in the shape of a new indie author. Well, let's talk about your new book in just a moment. As I've mentioned, a collection of short stories, Pieces of Fate. A lot of interest in this building surrounding this, because it involves a couple of stories that have a radio presenter at the heart of them. We'll be back with David P Elliot after this. David P Elliot's with me in the studio, however, talking about his role in publishing now, getting indie writers the opportunity to have readers read their writing, which is what it's all about, I suppose, is sharing those stories you come up with. And you have your own book that you've recently published as well. This is your second, Pieces of Fate. What made you decide to move from the novel that was your first, Clan, to a collection in this style?
Well, I've always written short stories. I've never tried to get them published, but I've always thought somehow that they were of secondary importance. You couldn't be a writer until you've written the novel, the full-length novel, and actually it's a different job.
I was going to say, I've been on a creative writing course, and the thing I was told that short stories were actually tougher because every word counts.
Yes, that's true, particularly if you're writing something for the BBC, and they will tell you exactly how many words it's got to be and that sort of thing, which can be a bit tricky. The nice thing about publishing it yourself in an anthology is the words that you took out for the BBC you can put back in again for your book. So
I like your way of thinking.
Yeah. So actually, the first story in Pieces of Fate is a story called Caroline that I actually wrote for the BBC short story competition for 2010. It didn't win, but I thought, having written it, then I would publish it, and because you can't publish really one short story. You can with e-books now, of course.
Yeah.
But
in the traditional format, though.
Yes.
You're going to a printer.
Yeah, the costs. It's just it just doesn't work out economically. So I started picking some other stories, and I've always liked short stories, and I've always liked. I call them tales of the unexpected, stories that have got a twist.
Supernatural slant, potentially.
Well, I think the thing that I like doing is trying to second guess the author when I'm reading a book, and if I don't get the end, then that's a good book, for a good story for mine. So I always like to write a story that's got a twist in it, and hopefully the reader actually doesn't see coming, despite the fact that they're looking for it. So,
yeah, that's the trick, isn't it?
That was quite key.
And as I mentioned, some familiar place settings in this collection, not just geographically on the Oxfordshire side of things, but there is a radio station on the Banbury Road that
absolutely
you've written about.
This very one,
yeah.
With a fictional presenter called Steve Finding, who has a radio series, a weekly, where he deals with suspected supernatural or paranormal sightings and investigates them. And he's a bit cynical, and he usually manages to debunk them all. And really, the first of those stories was called The Cottage, which is actually based on a house that I used to live in. And not unlike the characters in there, the couple in there, my wife then was convinced that there was a ghost in this house, a friendly ghost that she was fairly comfortable with. And I sensed things in the house but didn't really believe in any of it. So some of the things that happened in that story happened, but there was a need to find a way of telling the story, and the mechanism for telling it was to get this radio presenter, Steve Finding, who has this program called Finding Ghosts. It's a brilliant idea for BBC Radio Oxford.
I'll accept your proposal.
And he investigates this case, and the story develops from that. Once I'd written that, he seemed quite a powerful character to me, and that you could go on,
continue with him.
And when I was telling another story, the Long Alley, which again is set in, which this time is set in Abingdon, and beautiful almshouses in Abingdon called Long Alley, I decided to use that character again, and it actually progresses from the first story. So the plan is to write some more finding ghost stories, and maybe a full-length novel, and TV series, radio series.
The sky's the limit.
Yes.
What does it feel like as a writer when you write about so many different characters and you create so many different characters that one really steps out from the rest, as Finding has, obviously, for you, and almost takes you by the hand and goes, hang on, I've got more stories in me that you need to write?
Yeah, I think any writer will tell you that happens. Characters actually develop a life of their own. They really do. In Clan, there was a Colonel Batnikov, a Russian soldier, who was really only in the book to start off with to cover one piece of information that had to go out. But he seemed to develop a life of his own, and so he was one of the ones who I wanted to bring back and to develop further. So they do, and Steve Finding suddenly develops a character of his own, and I could see the potential for this character to go on. So that's how these characters develop. Stephen King has a wonderful book for anybody aspiring writer called On Writing, which is not one of his horror stories, but just about the craft of writing. And one of the things that he does, and it's so true, is he says about stories like archaeology. You actually put characters into a strange situation, and then it's like brushing away the dirt from it. You uncover them rather than create the story, and it's very true. Steve Finding became a character who told me what he was like in the end, rather than me creating him.
I'm a little bit wary of inviting you anywhere there, because the description you had of your radio station, which, as far as I've read so far, has remained unnamed, but the description of the coffee, of the reception, of the studio areas, I mean, this wasn't research gleaned off your last visit, was it?
No, it was here. I mean, there aren't two in the Banbury Road, I don't think, but I didn't actually want to use the name of the BBC Radio Oxford without their permission.
But does it mean that wherever you go, whatever you're experiencing in life, you're constantly looking for that detail?
And I was sat in this very room that we're sat in now, and that's how I pictured Steve Finding's room, albeit that he's doing his show late at night, and the glass windows we can see here, the soundproof room, with people being able to look through and signal and
although
so
without
on.
giving anything away, I would like to add that when I have my meeting with my producers of a morning, there's very rarely a bottle of scotch on the table. That is something that we haven't quite stretched to. What are you going to be doing next? Obviously, getting this book out and sharing these short stories with your readers is the most important aspect of things now?
That's key. I've got 3 things that I'm working on at the moment. One is something we're calling the Red Cap Project, which you alluded to earlier, which is really about we want to get support from people, and maybe we can ask your listeners to get onto our Red Cap Project petition and sign it, because we're trying to raise money to get perhaps a second-hand library vehicle that everybody seems to be getting rid of nowadays, to take indies books on the road, go to festivals and shows, and actually be able to sell these books on the road. So that's one thing that we're working hard on at the moment. I'm trying to write some screenplays for Steve Finding.
I'm liking this character more and more.
Well, like books, the reason books are so good is the pictures are great, just like radio. That's why radio's better, in my view, than TV, because the pictures are better.
Use the old grey matter.
Yes, absolutely. So actually, it would be nice to have a radio show made out of it. So we'll have a go at that and try submitting that to the... and of course, I'm halfway through Clan 2, the sequel. So, as I was saying to you before we went on air, actually, it's a tricky business to write a sequel, and you don't really appreciate it until you start doing it, because the stories have got to stand up in their own. You can't assume that people have read the first book, but also you want to your previous readers to read it as well. So there's a balance between how much you put in the original stuff you put in the second story, because you don't want to bore your previous readers, but they've got to know enough to be able to enjoy the sequel. So
what a great place to be in for you as a writer, with these new challenges, but also being in a place where, as much as you're looking forward, you can also hand on the experiences you've had thus far.
Well, that's what we're trying to do, and because actually I think a lot of people do something like writing thinking that, well, let's get out of industry and do something. I'm working harder than I've ever worked, but actually it's much more pleasurable. It doesn't seem like work.
As long as you're enjoying it, that's the main thing. It's been great catching up with you again. Thanks so much for coming in. People looking to find out a little bit more about what goes on in a radio station, fictional or real, Pieces of Fate is out now, published by Red Cap Publishing. Lovely to see you again, David. Thank you.
It's nice to see you, Jo.